for human resources, one of the major items that we always see on engagement and pulse surveys as an opportunity for employers is improvement of communications. And you referenced that organizations that have large populations that are hiring for peak seasons. So they're bringing in thousands of extra people, but don't necessarily have the supervisory staff to touch every single person as they come in. That communication just erodes. And I can absolutely see how this tool would bring efficiency to the communication process and help that supervisor to do their job during these peak seasons. So I know you'll get into the technology piece and how it actually works, but that long list of all of the things that CASI can actually do for employers to improve communication. There are a few others that I was thinking of. So certainly you had scheduling as key, but I can also see maybe giving onboarding information for new hires, welcoming them to the organization, making them feel comfortable on that first day of work. Emergency situations. So, right now, in the poor South with Helene is going through so many emergency processes, and there's many employers that are impacted by this, and they can't communicate with their employees. And sometimes SMS texting goes through before anything else when there's wide outages across the nation of applications, and that's one of the best ways to communicate. So I can see how there's just so many other possible applications to your tool, but so I'm looking forward to learning about it, about more.
Yeah, and that it's something we hear a lot, and when you think about text messaging and delivery rates, it's pretty outstanding as to how the engagement, the engagement figures, I should say, that we see. 98% of text messages are read in under 3 minutes. When you're asking for engagement, so some type of response to that text message, you have around a 95% engagement rate in those 3 minutes. So response back. So text messaging is by far the best way to reach employees. And one of the other things that you said is really indicative of the actual problem of communicating with employees. When you have large populations, let's say 50 people or more in a facility, communicating with them at scale is nearly impossible. I mean, just the act of communicating with each individual employee is very challenging. There are some tools out there, some just basic text message blast tools, obviously, that you can utilize, but the challenge comes when you need to target individuals. So as you mentioned, when you're onboarding people, let's say you're onboarding 10, 15 people a day for peak, if not more, having a workflow to be able to communicate with those people at specific intervals and a system that can automate that communication and feedback loop is so valuable to really making the employee feel at home when they, come into that facility for the first time. There's a lot of anxiety, when a new employee starts just within that first week, and really, the outreach to that you're able to do with a system like CASI to reduce that just helps speed up their onboarding so much more dramatically than anything else you can do. One of the things that we're really focused on here is scheduling, but obviously this communication loop, like emergency communications going out, targeted level communications about shift changes. If you have a delayed shift, like let's say for Helene, everyone was so worried about when the power was coming back on. And so there's constant communications going out with targeted individuals within those facilities, whether it was shift based or department based. And so that is really key in being able to operate a facility efficiently. Impacts we really see is in turnover. One of the things that you typically hear are the top 2 reasons for turnovers: 1, pay, but 2, dissatisfaction with the supervisor staff or management staff within a facility. And a lot of that comes down to individual management styles, and a lot of that is within communication. And so just in providing a communication feedback loop where an employee can communicate regularly, and you can control the narrative of those messages, we've seen reductions of turnover of around 16% in the facilities that implement this type of solution. And so the value there, as you can imagine, is immense when you start thinking about all the costs within turnover that is going out the door within these facilities.
And one of the business pain points that I've heard from clients in the past is that it's very difficult sometimes to forecast demand levels.
Right.
And so while every employer tries to get it right, and they do, regression analysis, forecasting, planning, whatever they need to do to try to forecast what that demand is going to be, there usually is a 20 to 40% miss in most cases. And that impacts staffing and the employee base. And
Right.
so many levers that employers use, they may call it other things, but it essentially is mandatory overtime.
Yeah.
If demand is higher than what they anticipated or scheduled for, or worse, sometimes if demand is much lower and then they don't have the work for their employee base and they have to, ask them to stay home for the day, in which case they're not
Sure.
getting income. The other thing is the employee no longer has control over their schedule. They just don't have work-life balance when those things happen. And every generation, even though we tout Generation Z and wanting more work-life balance, I think every generation wants that. And it disrupts their lives if on a Friday, demand is so high that supervisors, managers have to go out and tell their employees that they have to come into work tomorrow, regardless of whatever they had planned on that Saturday. And so it's very disruptive. So I can see how this solution can really help this pain point for employers, because you literally can have a contingent on demand workforce and people can volunteer to come in to work that Saturday, right? So you can reach out through text messaging, say, hey, we've got this shift now available. And those people that want that extra income and are free to work can opt in. And then when you've hit that level of people that you need, you then send messages out to say, thanks for volunteering, but we have enough people. We'll get you next time. And then the reverse can happen, right? I guess if volume's not there and you need people to leave early on a Friday, you can ask if you need 20 people to volunteer, you send it out to 100 and the first 20 get it. I think it's great. So I can absolutely see all of these impacts, but I just think from a business case perspective, it can also be applied and be much deeper.
Well, and one of the things that I'll say that really stuck out when you were mentioning those challenges, Tracy, is a lot of facilities don't have the ability to gauge call outs on a day-to-day basis, right? And so they don't even have a really good system for handling incoming call outs. Historically, and what we see, and I would say over 80% of the case, is most of the facilities that we go into have a call out line. And that call out line is really just to keep people honest, if you will. And so that call out line is not really an operational piece. It's more of a point system measurement piece on holding the employee accountable. And so what I mean by that is it takes generally a few hours for someone in a department to sit there and listen to voicemails about people calling out and then document them for points. It's a terrible use of human resources time. And more so, it doesn't give anyone on the floor actionable intelligence about what's going to happen that day. So what we see is employers say, well, over the course of the year, on average, I had 10% of people calling out throughout the day. Well, and so what happens is they overstaff each shift by 10% to make sure they have the correct amount of personnel. But over the course of the year, the amount of lost in payroll that happens because of the inability to adjust daily is tremendous. And so one of the things CASI does is CASI actually pulls in. So instead of employee calling a call out line, they can text CASI that they're going to miss the shift. CASI asks them a series of questions about why they're missing the shift. and then provides a report to the floor supervisors at the start of shift, and then in specific intervals that an employer can dictate, but also provides a report so you can go back, measure that against weather patterns, measure it against specific holidays or whatever is going on at that time to really drill down and get a good sense for what's happening for call outs. And then CASI has the ability to backfill those positions in real time. So if someone calls out, let's say 2 hours before the shift, CASI can actually reach out to everyone qualified in that department to see if there's someone that's not on shift that can come in and work it. So it's really kind of closing these gaps on these small pieces that you can't do at scale, but through automation and AI, you can absorb these, these real-time effects that are happening within the facility.
What are some real stats? And I'm going to actually talk about a client that you and I both worked with,
Sure.
that I asked you to come in and help with some of the challenges that they were having. And one was they had incredible turnover. They were trying to get their arms around what was the cause of the turnover. And so after a little bit of analysis, it was determined that it was that mandatory overtime lever that they were pulling, or when they had to ask people to temporarily take time off without pay. So
Yeah.
that was causing their turnover. So your tool actually helped resolve that. And so they were able to save about $2 million over a 2-year period of time after the implementation of your tool, which was just incredible, primarily because they didn't have to hire as many people. They didn't have, right, that turnover. They leveled off their staffing to be able to meet the demand at hand. Do you have any other statistics that you'd like to share that are, real life experiences?
Yeah, and it's pretty consistent. I mean, on average, we see around that, between that 13 to 16% reduction in turnover. If you think about it, especially these days in this day and age, with inflation being so high, a lot of the hourly employees are paycheck to paycheck. And one of the challenges that hourly employees have is their infrastructure to handle specific type of issues that come up, whether it be childcare, whether it be a vehicle issue or what have you, is very limited. They just don't have that infrastructure to be able to absorb those type of impacts. And so if the employee doesn't have flexibility to miss a shift, they feel like it's an injustice to them a lot of times. And so when you start calling for mandatory overtime, that compounds tremendously. Is does pulling away opportunity for them to generate revenue without them having any say in the matter. And so, what we see is within a population, through the implementation of technology, you're able to target the people that will participate in these things voluntarily. So there's always someone that wants more work. There's always someone that wants less work. And if you have the ability to engage with those people at scale, the facility can run much more efficiently. You can allow flexibility for that employee to handle these type of situations that may come up, but you do so voluntarily. And so you put the power back into the employee's hands, all in the meantime while making the facility more efficient. Not only do we see the reduction in turnover as a major outcome of this solution, but we also see something that's pretty interesting on the employer side, and that's the reduction of having to use staffing agencies. And the reason I say that is because with this tool, you're able to have a pool of ready employees that are available to communicate with indefinitely, unless the employee states that, they can always stop text messaging if they want to. We see that probably around 1 to 2% of the time happening. So let's say you have a big population that comes in during a peak time period. All of a sudden, now you have a pool when that peak ends, you have a pool of part-time employees that you can access. And so what we see typically is we see a 99%, a little bit higher, in some cases, fulfillment rate of shift requests that go out. through employees that have already been onboarded to the employer. And so we're seeing a reduction of around 30% in cost to the employer. Because that employee is already an internal employee, they're not having to pay those staffing partners when they have to pull those levers to increase staffing levels.
I can't help but think that I see the use of this technology on a daily basis. I just got a confirmation from my dental office, respond with a C,
Right.
It's so convenient. So I can understand, or actually I like the idea of using the simplified text message, easy adoption for the employee side of it. I'm sure that there is a lot of resistance to picking up the phone, making phone calls when you can just text in. It just seems like a very good fit for the application. So it's a very good use of technology. Like I said, I'd like to hear more about some of the integration points, some of the technology platforms. So I'll wait till the end on that.